Hello, we're live and welcome back to the Self-Help Bookshelf, where we talk about personal development and personal growth strategies to help you find your higher self through high leverage actions. So I'm Reeve and this is Rory Lemon. I'm an emotional awareness expert. I like helping coaches, mentors, therapists, teachers, managers, and more to work with teenagers, young adults, and adults in disadvantaged groups with emotional awareness. Rory, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Kay. My name's Rory Lemon. I go by Rory Lemon AI aid to AID to help to spelled as like that. Uh I'm a neurodiversity expert and creative flow coach for those that are potentially neurodivergent, heart-centered, hypersensitive creatives that want to get out of the procrastinations and the perfectionisms and the stuck, scatter mind loops that can so easily stop us from achieving the things we want in life.
Wow, yes, that's a lot covered between us. So, yeah, we love bringing you conversations that are, for us, this is an unscripted conversation every week. We're over 20 so far, so check back on the playlist for a lot of other really inspiring topics. But for us, we like to use our expertise from years of knowledge and experience to just have these conversations and bring as much information and inspiration and motivation as we can to you, while it challenges us to keep on top of our game and just see what exactly we can pull out of the ether with random topics. But no, they're not just random topics. They are topics that are very often the point of really feeling stuck for some people, or something they might not have been aware of, something that very often can help just to have that extra thought and input about it. So tonight, when we're talking about the neurodiversity, and I like working with parents of teenagers and young adults as well, especially those, for me, my key area where it comes from in my background is autistic spectrum and suicidal depression, as in the background of helping my son through some very difficult times. Also discovered in recent years, I've got ADHD and possibly some other things. And Rory, I know you've talked about yours. You've got a few things going on as well. And so tonight's topic, we are talking about neurodiversity and labels. Taken a while to get to the title tonight, haven't I?
Yeah.
Going round about the houses here. And it can be a really contentious topic at times, but it can also be really useful, I think, to have some different inputs on it. And there are lots of reasons why I think labels are really helpful, lots of reasons why they're not. And tonight, we're not going to judge them good or bad, but we're going to help, hopefully, for you to see labels in a slightly different way that is supportive, and to let go of some of the negativity that's held onto with them and find the purpose for these labels. So is there anything you want to kick off with today, Rory, on this?
I think it's important just to define what I think neurodiversity is, first of all. Um,
Good point.
Covered it a little bit before in a couple of other topics, but neurodiversity linked in the same way that it's a similar thing to biodiversity. The biodiversity is the scope across in which all life differentiates to adapt to its environment. So, how many different types of lemur are there? I think lemur is probably the most uh, differentiated species there is on this planet. I think so. Yeah, it was like 100 and something. Yeah, it's 100 and something different types of lemur.
Okay,
Uh,
it's got a bit of doing to catch up with spiders then. That come out a quiz night the other week, something like 38,000 types of spider or something.
or maybe it was mammals or something,
But
animals rather than.
yeah, but yeah, there's depends on how diverse the diversity is in itself versus different species. But the point is there. Yes, there's a point is there. There's a lot of them.
Yeah, so the point being is that, throughout all organic life that reproduces and explores its environment and feeds off stuff and all this kind of stuff, biology being stuff you can grab hold of. Um, and if that makes, whereas
It's very, very pragmatic. I like that one.
whereas neurodiversity, yes, the nervous system is a structure in itself, a nervous tissue. However, we're talking about really neurodiversity is about the broad scope of how different uh, humans, brains, and people across the whole board can react or respond or learn in their environment. That's how I describe it. And so across the whole board, so we're not even talking like it's a label for all labels, if that makes sense. Neurodiversity in
Yeah.
its and diverse is the bit that starts to get interesting around the difference between typical and diverse. And so when someone is talking about neurotypical, it's really a uh what's the word?
Starting point.
It's a statistic, just like any label actually is a statistic. In fact, any type of neurodiverse label, we can get into the differences, but even a label in itself is a typical
Yeah.
description of of a group of individuals that react and respond or learn in that way. So so this is where it gets very interesting and debatable as to what actually is neurotypical and what is
Mm.
neurodiverse.
Yeah. And that's a really good point because, when a lot of people think, oh, labeling is a bad thing. We don't like labeling. But actually, just calling somebody normal is a label. Calling them unidentifiable is a label in itself. Unidentified flying objects is a label, for
Yeah.
things that we can't identify. So even being, the amount of times I've had people refer to me as neurotypical because they're using it as a reflection against what they don't like, and it's like a throwback label. But they don't know my diagnosis or not, and still call me neurotypical. And for a lot of time, I believed them until I found out even that was wrong. But but so, but there is this huge thing around people believe that labels are a form of name calling. And yeah, and it's right, there is a lot of it around where it does get misused and abused and used against people. And I think that in itself is sad that it creates this negativity around labeling as a whole. And yet at the same time, I've even heard this week somebody very, very casually saying, oh, that's really odd, or something to that effect, or they're really strange. And yet that is the label we give to things we don't understand. And very often when it's people we don't understand and their behaviors we don't understand, and we call it odd or strange or weird, usually, not always, but very often that can actually be attributed to something in neurodiversity, in neurodivergent traits, in whatever form of diagnosis. And when you're talking about all the different variations of lemurs, for example, there is, and I should have looked this up earlier. I can't remember the name of the book, but there is a book that psychologists use that have, like we're talking clinical psychologists, that has a list of all the diagnosable mental health disorders in it. And there are over 450 diagnosable mental health disorders. And when we think about diversity being a spectrum, like diversity includes everything, and we have neurotypical plus all these other 450 diagnosable mental health disorders, every one of them in itself is part of a spectrum of traits or a collection of traits. And every one of those traits can be really helpful right through to really unhelpful to each individual. And then you put collections of them together to create these 450 diagnosable mental health disorders. That is probably thousands and thousands of different traits that can be organized into those categories. And so the labeling itself is a really complex process to help understand what somebody's going through, how severely it affects them, and which of the traits are helpful to them and which are unhelpful. So which are strengths, which are weaknesses. And in all of that, this process of labeling, when we avoid it, helps us to learn and understand those strengths and weaknesses. It holds us back from learning about those strengths and weaknesses, when very often people will only focus on the things that they're challenged by, stuck with, things they can't do, things that people nag them about and label them for. So we're going to get labeled anyway: stupid, useless, worthless, unable to achieve this, uneducated, clumsy. There's all kinds of words that people will use to judge. And judgment in itself is a form of labeling. So to me, actually understanding all these different perspectives of name calling and judgments and categorizing people as personalities is actually no different than labeling somebody with the neurodiversity, except the neurodiversity is a more constructive label when we look at using it correctly. And one of the biggest things I like to think of it as, if you go into hospital and you've had an accident and the doctors look at you and go, no, I can't label that. I can't diagnose it because I'm not allowed to label it. You're not going to be very pleased with the medical process of not diagnosing what you've gone in to heal. So why do we treat it so differently with mental health, that everybody's afraid of getting a diagnosis? Because a diagnosis is what helps to heal physically. And when we treat it right with mental health disorders, it can be exactly the same. Now, neurodiversity isn't always a mental health disorder in the literal sense, as in depressed, stressed, anxious, and overwhelmed, but it all goes hand in hand. So yes, Rory, go on.
I just remind that neurodiversity is everything. So if you're, I think
Oh, if I said it wrong again, I'm saying it. Yeah,
neurodivergence
neurodivergent. Yeah.
is a particular group. It's a particular group. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, there's me in a habit of saying that, but yes, correctly caught, neurodivergent. So yeah, if you're going for a neurodivergent diagnosis and they just go, oh, can't label that, the same as can't label physical, it's not going to help us discover what challenges we have in terms of those personality traits, so we can learn to work with them, get support, find ways to cope, coping strategies, but also learn to work with the strengths that we have. And a lot of people don't like being told they have superpowers. Some people embrace their superpowers. And it's, again, I know I've got mine. And for a long time, I knew I had them, but I didn't know why. I didn't know that I had the ADHD, but I knew I was forgetful. I knew that I couldn't process memory very well. And I've even got through job interviews 10 years ago where in fact, longer. No, it was 2010. I had a job interview and they said, okay, you've told us all your strengths. What's one of your weaknesses? I said, I'm really forgetful. And this is for an admin job, a high level admin job. And they said, okay, so how do you get around that? I said, well, I keep logs of everything and I make lots of notes, which for an admin job is the perfect way to do it. And they went, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, we can work with that. And I still got the job, despite being really vulnerable and saying I'm forgetful. And I had no idea then why I was so forgetful, but now I understand it. But I'd learned, even without having the diagnosis, to make my weakness my strength in another way. And I think a lot of people do, but understanding through the collection of personality traits that goes with a specific diagnosis can be really helpful in piecing life together again when it has felt overwhelming and stuck and procrastinating, and all the things that you talk about with your coaching is absolutely brilliant. And it certainly helped me this last year to come to terms with those few little bits that I hadn't understood. So yeah. I think I'm throwing a lot in here today, so I'm going to let you catch up before I take over the whole hour.
Okay, that's good. So I just to pick a few things and just stabilize a couple of points around that, being that firstly, yeah, a diagnosis from my point of view, me not knowing um, about dyslexia, having feedback from friends saying you're probably dyslexic a few times in my life, but I was like, well, what's the point in knowing that? I know who I am by now. I'm 30 or whatever, and 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 but I had a revelation going through the mental health crisis in my early, in my tw when I was 20, and going through a period of psychosis and recovering again in so quickly, 14 weeks with reflexology, no counseling or standard medication or anything like that, was positively shocking for me. So
Mm.
having going through that process, I was like, I'm back to feeling like I can function totally how I was 3 years before the lead up to that. So, and it was all because I just didn't believe I was a communicator, or didn't know, I hadn't practiced how to communicate my feelings or thoughts, or see what was possible to process myself, and then or ask for help if not, if I couldn't. So all of that process was just bottled up frustration and not knowing about that. So yeah, the diagnosis when I went through when I did the studies, I insisted on it twice. It was like the driving test. I did my driving test twice to get through it, because I just couldn't show that I knew what to do, or was, yeah, it's just take me longer to process information and turn it into embodied action. So there's like this gap where information would come, and then how to embody it. It's either, or feels quite all or nothing, because if I don't practice and learn it completely solidly until becomes completely embodied, then I won't learn it at all. So I had to just all the way through my life choose what to really focus on and learn. It was like every single time I was listening to information about people talking, I was like, do I want to learn that? Oh, I do, yes. And then I would just write it out and talk to myself about it and do things to learn all the way through my life, just to even respond to anything. So long story, slightly less long. The diagnosis of the dyslexia gave me the report of which was less strong. Like the working memory was very small compared to reasoning skills, because, and this is where it um, comes back to we're always focusing on something. So if we're focusing on something, even if it's darting about, the brain is processing something, other information whilst that's happening. So, so for me, after doing lots of interviews and talking with people and getting really fascinated with all this stuff for so long since then, and just discovering the patterns in who I'm talking to, I've had like at least two or three conversations like this for 5 years straight, every single week, with people. So I'm consistently picking up information about the types of how people even look, can even sometimes that be part of their personality type. Like it's really interesting to see how people can look a particular way, act a particular way, and then see where they're when they say, "Oh yes, I've been diagnosed with ADHD," or I'm considering it, all that kind of stuff. So coming back to the like almost the biodiversity of us, and the neurodiversity is interlinked through the mind and the body. So um my point being that the diagnosis really helps, but there's not any information about what's possible to change. So so it is important, but it's not as important, I believe, as just finding out what's the problem is, and actually having guidance, or having a sense of being with someone that's overcome something. Because regardless of whether there is a diagnosis or not, if we don't think something's possible, we won't try and grow and learn from it. And so I've became much easier at reading. It still baffles me, but I can read to a decent enough, a standard enough level that I don't get tired, too quickly. And finally, so snapshot, diagnosis is a snapshot in time. That's my point that I'm so passionate about and going, yes, find out what label it is in that moment, but don't assume, not necessarily assume. And the other, and that it's not possible to do anything about it. And then the other piece that came up for me was that um, there's uh, the idea of it's it's there's a judgment
Mm.
on the labels, and that's an automated approach. Yeah. So when we feel like we're being judged, that ends up being a choice that we're making in those moments too. So
Oh, trigger, yeah.
that's that idea that it's important to remember to um, know thyself and to know what's happening when people are talking. If people are talking or saying anything and we react to it, that's just learnt. Again, that's another learnt thing.
Mm.
And those that are able to learn how to adapt and change from that, regardless of what anyone else says, that's again another important piece to the journey in neurodiversity.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic, Roy. A lot there. Yeah, so much involved in, like you say, just understanding the self. At the end of the day, it's all about understanding yourself. And more than, we want to fit into society. And when we feel like we can't, or we feel like we can't fit into certain job roles and can't achieve certain levels, it's not about necessarily trying to then fit where we don't belong. It's about understanding ourselves and learning how we can step out into the world in a way that we fit naturally and where we feel like we belong and find the people that feel like our tribe and we belong with. I don't mean literally building a tribe, but people that we genuinely connect with for all the right reasons, instead of trying to connect with people that don't get us. And that's where we've got lots of other strategies and tips on this channel, on this playlist about how we can work with circle of influence and comfort zones and goals and all sorts of topics that help around that. And there's, you were saying about getting that diagnosis again with my son because my son was diagnosed about over 20 years ago. And I kept, people kept saying to me, oh, you don't need to label him. You don't need to label him. But my son was suicidal, right? And there are people telling me I don't need to label him and saying it really negatively and trying to almost put me off and judge me for trying to support my son. Now, I didn't understand why he was so suicidal, why he had all of these problems going on in his head, why he was struggling to get on with his schoolwork, to mix with other people, why he was constantly banging his head on things and punching things. And so I was looking up various different things, whether it was ADD, ADHD, dyslexia, and other things, but I hadn't necessarily heard of the Asperger's to start with, although now we call it autistic spectrum disorder. But in the time, it was then quite freshly referred to as Asperger's. And for me, looking at all of them, they all had, whether it was dyslexia or ADHD or the autistic spectrum disorder, have all got different traits that create challenges, different things that are overwhelming or underwhelming, different sensory needs versus avoidances. And that includes the ability to be around other people, either need to be, again, or struggle to be around other people. And so until I knew quite what was going on, how could I provide the right support for my son? And for me, that's where that label was important. Now, he, for a long time, didn't like that label because he felt judged and stood out. And then he challenged it himself and wanted to undo the diagnosis. And the more he challenged it, the more it stood out that he had got autistic spectrum disorder, or ASD. And it wasn't until he finally learned to embrace who he is, accept the challenge he has and the strengths he has, and find coping strategies for the things he wanted to work over, found which bits he could accept that he didn't need to address because they weren't relevant to him, and look at what strengths he had as well. And when he learned to embrace all of that, do you know what? Nobody knows since then that he's on the autistic spectrum. He is just who he is, and he's learned to fit in. But he had to understand himself first before other people could understand him. And I think that is the biggest thing when we don't understand ourselves, but want other people to understand us. How can they? Because until we can present authentically, how can someone else know who we really are? And I had that challenge as well myself, but hadn't realized how much mine had even affected me until I was on my own after divorce. And it wasn't until I was living on my own that I realized how much having somebody in my life had provided me support where I'd had weaknesses, and I'd done the same for him, for his weaknesses. But I knew about his, he wasn't neurodivergent, but he was close to, but I hadn't understood mine. And that ended up, my weaknesses became a big contention within the relationship. So there's another reason why it can be really important, is to recognize and address those, to make transitions, compensations, coping strategies within relationships as well, whether that is a personal relationship, a work relationship, with children, with parents. It doesn't have to be necessarily a romantic one, but being able to work around that is really important. And if we don't know, we're just constantly battling this invisible barrier. And another thing, just sorry, before I hand it back to you, is I want you to imagine this is a tin of baked beans, right? Now, to me, this is the other thing I see a lot of, is constantly, when we talked about Asperger's is now called ASD, is changing labels. Now, to me, if I've got a tin of baked beans and someone says, oh, we shouldn't call them baked beans, don't like baked beans. Okay, we'll change the label. We'll call them something else. So we've swapped the label over. But what's inside? It's still a tin of baked beans. They're still the same tin of baked beans, the same recipe or neurodivergent makeup for the individual person, regardless of what label we put on them. It doesn't change the contents. And so to me, changing labels doesn't resolve anything either. What's more important is that we learn to understand the individuals behind the label. So the label is there for the individual to help understand themselves, but for the people around them, once they can show up authentically, they don't necessarily need to show everybody that label or tell them about it. It's more, and it's not about having to go to every job and say, I've got this and I've got that, or having to tell every person in your life, unless, of course, it significantly impacts you enough that they need that understanding. It's more about understanding of the self. And I think when we get that concept out of the label, that we don't have to tell everybody we've got this label. I know we do, because we share it from a point of inspiring and supporting others. But for others, it could be purely from a point of self-understanding, self-growth, personal growth, and using all the strategies that we've got on this podcast and more to work with who you are, to be the best version of who you are, your higher self, through high leverage actions. And it works for everybody. And that's the one thing we know, is all of this, including working with the emotional awareness and Rory's strategy, works for both neurotypical and neurodivergent people across the spectrum. Rabbit hole out of. Before I go too deep, there's lots of rabbit holes I could go into with this, but we're keeping this neutral today in terms of, like we say, non-judgmental and supportive.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for sharing all of that. It's important. There's really important perspectives to sort of almost separate from. And it's separating from things to look at and give perspective on it, but also there are elements to arguments as to when to associate with a label and when to not associate with a label, and when to change it and when not to change it as well. I believe, but yeah, it's I see your points in not just, just changing things for no reason, or it's not about, or externalizing the the associations as to why or how it's all happening, because at the end of the day we don't really ever know why we're alive, or why this is all happening. But yeah, it's great to yeah, be aware of all of that and have perspective. And I wanted to actually, because we're talking about this, just gonna read off the typical labels and also some typical strengths and weaknesses, because I think we can then talk about that in a little way. So there's six main types of neurodivergence at this time that are most modern, being able to be seen as traits, although often it doesn't often exist in its own continuum of it just being this one thing, which is often the case nowadays. Is like, oh, someone potentially discovers they have autism later on after the ADHD diagnosis, or like for me, having all these conversations of dyslexia, um, I also see massive amounts of ADHD and autistic traits in myself too that I've actually managed to um, shift and change, but I still see where that all sits as well, what hasn't changed through growing my brain and learning how to speak talk and learning English for the first time properly. But yeah, so ADHD is one,
Way. Well done.
ASD is another, dyslexia, Tourette syndrome, dyscalculia, and dyspraxia. And I actually see the patterns in these quite well. So ADHD is much more of a behavioral and mental sort of focus kind of thing. Autism, it's often more of an organizational or emotional reactivity or non-reactivity thing. Very typically, going very typical on this. Dyslexia being about language processing and not necessarily just reading or writing. Someone can be hyperlexic, but still categorized in dyslexia because they can read so much so quickly, but don't necessarily process it or take it in. So they can just read it and then regurgitate it from their larger working memory. So you can have large working memory and no reasoning, and that is completely different to what I have, which is just short working memory and large reasoning.
Mm.
As an example, you got dyspraxia being more about spatial awareness, very broad again. Tourette syndrome is about not being able to inhibit um, reactions. So often that sometimes is words coming out, it's motor responses without any inhibition,
Yeah.
and then there's dyscalculia, which is more to do with number processing. So yeah, all of these different ones. Then really again quickly, challenges across the whole board of neurodivergence and neurodiverse rather than neurotypical is difficult concentrating, prone to depression or anxiety, managing time poorly, trouble concentrating. That's the same. Difficulty controlling emotions, difficulty organizing things, having problems with reading, spelling, math skills, or balance, difficulty communicating, poor socializing and needing routine. And then on the strengths side of things, which was not picked up on for years and years and years and years, and it's only just really coming about when they're actually talking about it properly, is that often with these things where it's observed these challenges, there's often the 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 strengths, as you were saying, creative thinking, having hyper focus, so being able to stay focused on something if it's interesting rather than important, being adventurous, thinking outside of the box, observing detail, like exquisite detail,
Mhm.
having specialist skills, memorizing ability, being empathetic, following rules, being entrepreneurial, and having practical skills. So within all of that,
That's me. The list
yay!
was me perfectly, apart from I think one thing,
Yeah.
literally. But yeah, and yet never knew all those years.
And there'll be sliding scale on that. So the whole
Mm.
point is that we're not here to like say we're all a little bit like this.
Yeah.
There is elements of how that to see how those patterns exist in reality, and how if we start to work on something as a skill, if we work on concentrating, if you can get hyper fixated but then have difficulty concentrating, that doesn't even make any sense if you look at it from the polarity, because it depends on what is wanting to be happened, and or who is judging what the task is supposed to be about, and who is judging whether it's I want to do this but I can't do this but I keep focusing on this. That's it's all crazy because it's all invisible, but it's all not taught that it's possible to work on and as a skill. So um the final roundup of what I was going to say about that I think it's highly environmental, and just because someone may be clumsy in one way, is that because they're trying to do something that they haven't learned how to do, and or if they need to be doing that as if you take someone that is um, very, very spontaneous, can't remember a lot of things, but can be really focused in the moment, uh, and doing stuff outdoors and focused and moving. Uh, and then you put them in a library to sit still and read books and or put things in alphabetical order. It's environmental and what we think we should be doing, or not. So that's what I'm sort of rounding it back up to, is that labels are important. See what where the strengths and weaknesses are, and it's not to discount what becomes really challenging or has been challenging from the word go, and it's just to invite the idea that what we believe is stuck isn't necessarily stuck, and or if the opportunity is there for someone to be in the right environment, right support, can they thrive rather than just survive?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's that's gone. That just came and went.
Yay. Baked beans? Baked beans?
Yeah, baked beans just came and went. Yeah, there's a lot in there, Rory, again. Honestly, that whatever thought that was, and literally vanished as quickly as it arrived. And this is a classic example of what can happen, actually. Um, I'm normally not like this on the screen as much as I was last year. But I had a lot of food allergy issues in on top of it as well last year. But I think the heat's getting to me today.
Reading, processing, listening, moving, labels, spectrum, challenges.
Wow.
I'm just repeat. I'm saying a few things to see if you can remember what it was.
No, it's gone. Well and truly gone. But yeah. Oh, anyway. So no, it is the labeling thing is, we understand there are a lot of people out there that really don't like feeling labeled or being labeled. And very often, if that is the case, it could be because how people around them are treating them around that label and judging them. And that can actually be a point of looking at whether or not there's perhaps some forms of abuse going on, whether there is family abuse, belittling somebody, calling them names. Um, and also, on the other hand, when there is a lot of abuse in a family, sometimes that can be around undiagnosed neurodiversity as well, and neurodivergent traits. But certainly to be aware of where that's going on is not necessarily that the label is a bad thing, but if there wasn't that neurodivergent label, then maybe that abuse would be happening over something else anyway. And they would still be calling stupid, worthless, useless, everything else, clumsy, all the other things without the label. So when people say that the label causes bullying, the chances are that bullying would have existed anyway, just it would have been used with other terminology and other traits. And they would have had to go at people for the traits rather than the label. So is there ways in which, I'm just trying to think, there's ways in which we can suggest people deal with this if this is going on in their life? So rather than, deny the label, how can we help you as our viewers, because we do value you and we know where we've been and what we've seen. And I know the judgments I had all my life over lots of different things. And I never really understood that those judgments were actually like 54 years of diagnosing my neurodiversity before I had any, and my ADHD before I had any notion that I had ADHD. So yes, go on, Rory.
Please, can I speak? Um, what I would say to that, just as what's coming up for me around that, if there is an issue with feeling judged or bullied or whatever it is, or feeling like stuck in a relationship that feels difficult to get out of, is um, the number one thing is to become non-reactive. That's the very first thing. It's the best thing you can possibly do is, and I don't mean fight against your reactions because you're going to have them, and then don't make yourself, it's not about making yourself wrong if you do react, but it's about just practicing the art of presence. And I like to say, know your ABCs, which is awareness brings choice.
Mm,
So as soon as you're aware and you just stay in it and don't react, if someone is saying something, um, the very first step is just to not say anything and
mm,
to uh, just, if it's possible, just not say anything and then say I'll come back to you on that or whatever it is, and then go away and calm down and keep doing that and keep doing that and have your own space. And if there's any, that's as far as I can, because all situations are different. But if there's not a safe space to go to and calm and relax and breathe, um, then that's when to reach out for support, because or to find someone you can talk to about it, because people, I like to say, be a greasy pole. So you, you can't you can't give someone something to grip onto and judge you if you're not reacting. And so the pole, you try and climb a greasy pole, you'll just slide down. So just no facial expressions, no nothing, and say what, and if they, so if it's like what you're not going to answer or whatever it is, just say, um, uh, I'm going to think about that.
yeah, it's not giving them something to hold on to. Like, don't let them have a hold over you.
Yeah.
And it is a powerful thing. And I suppose a good example of that would be like talking about the police or military or someone or anybody in the emergency services when they're being faced with somebody in a crowd or in a situation that person's going and they just stand stock still. And another version of that is to be a stone, right? Just literally be a stone or be the rock, and just whatever they're doing, as you stand there and you just think, oh, they're having a moment, or they're having a judgment, or they're having a bad day, or they seem to have a bit of a problem, but it's they, not you as the individual, isn't it? And it's realizing that it's not personal, it's them and their judgment and their reaction. And when you react back, that's when the problems kick off. Yeah.
And the only other thing I'd add to that is, um, if they really keep going with it, just say, T "Can you explain that more, please?" And have them just talk themselves into realizing
Mm.
something that they're latching onto until they run out of reasoning. Just go, "Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I don't get it. Can you tell me more about it?" Until they just run out of steam, and then they'll probably go off and do something else. So there's not reacting, or I need some space and going away, or um, explain to me more about that, because
Or explain where this is coming from, or
yeah, maybe. But yeah, even
explain
to allow them to come to a realization that their
they're
judgment is
reacting. Yeah.
flawed
Mm.
because they're just used to getting a reaction. So yeah.
Mm. But when it's teenagers and young adults, that can be more difficult against adults. But they've got to learn to realize that over time, actually, that being calm in the self, and when other people are judging, is realizing that's them, they're misthinking having a judgment. and not to take it personally. And again, right from young, if they can learn to do this, it really gives them so much more power. I mean, my son went from like triggering and reacting and being so angry at the slightest little things to he got to a point one day he was working in a really busy kitchen on a hot day, and one of his managers kicked off and had a moment and turned around and said something to my son, "Are you on mind altering drugs or something?" And he really shouted at him. And normally somebody got on quite well with. But in that moment, my son just went, okay, he's having a moment. And he walked away and just went and got on with his work and just ignored it. And it was a really severe comment, judgment, nasty criticism that was really below the belt. But my son was able to just walk away and go, you know what? He's not having a good moment. I'm going to get out the way. And that is how we want to be handling it. That, yeah. And when I realized that 50 odd years of judgment against me and all the things people had said, and I made a long list of all these judgments before I clicked, there's something in this. There's some reason why all of these people say these things, because whether I'd lived in 3 different counties, I'd had, I don't know, about 20 different jobs. And when all of those people, I realized, are all saying the same things about me, but they didn't all know each other. I'm thinking, got to be something behind this. And that's when I really actually wrote it all in a list and then started to investigate. I realized that that's when, you know what, that list of judgments actually matches a list of ADHD, but just not worded as a diagnosis, but the reflections were the same. And so if people are being judgmental, take it as a gift to listen to and try and understand what's going on behind it, rather than triggering, reacting, getting angry, throwing things back, because that solves nothing. And it's learning to turn that into that gift is really powerful. Now anybody can say anything and I'm fine. It's like, yeah, they don't understand, but I've got it, you know. As long as I understand me, that's what matters the most. And you understand you. And it has made a huge difference when I realized that. How about you? Do you get
Lovely.
judgment still?
Um, I I didn't really ever get judgments because it was all self. When I realized about what was going on for me and the struggles I was going through, I realized it was all self-judgment. So I would just that's why I went through that whole mental health crisis, because I would just be sweet as pie all the time for everyone and anyone because I would not be judging them at all, and I didn't realize I was just consistently resenting, being frustrated that I couldn't explain my ideas. And if I would have done, maybe I'd have started getting criticisms back, because
Mm.
all the ideas I have would have been often I would be like, I can't really say that because it's going against everything that everything people talk about. Because when Einstein says the more wise you get as you get more wise, the weirder you become to everyone. And so that's it. I just did not have any of and a lot so much like I don't stereotype. I never uh uh I just didn't really
Mm.
act or do the things that people normally do, as it were.
You're just being yourself.
Yes, which was listen to music absolutely non-stop.
Yeah, I don't think, there is a lot of things where people are just being themselves and go, I'm fine, I don't need a diagnosis, and that's fine as well. But if you understand who you are, what you like doing in your life, what your strengths are, and you're getting on great in life, then yeah, there's no need for it. In the same way, but like you say, when it is eating you up on the inside or creating difficulties in the life around you, diagnosed or not, then that's time to look at, what are the problems. At the end of the day, we're here. We're here. You can reach out to either of us and have a talk. Co-creation, absolutely. That is exactly what we're doing. And we love working with other people as well. But yeah, we're here and we're happy to book a chat. You can book a free chat with either of us. And, whether you want to explore the concept of there being neurodiversity or a specific thing that you're stuck with or challenged with or overwhelmed with, then absolutely. We hope we have and inspired you enough to feel more comfortable with labels, right? It's not like baggage where you've got lots of stickers put on your baggage and it just gets heavier and heavier. This is about making it feel lighter, right? And making it feel more workable for you, and where you get to know you and be the best version of you without having to throw labels back at other people in return in the same way. But yes, so is there anything else you want to finish up on today, Rory? Because I've realised we've absolutely flown around the hour. That went really quickly.
Yeah, no, it's all good. I think we've covered it all.
Yeah, so we said we were going to
No,
keep to
just,
half an
no,
hour, but we never do.
just bear in mind, neurodiversity is the big scope of everything, and science is basically looking for, and science is, as a rule, looking for the average on
Mm.
anything to do with science is where's the pattern, what's the average, what's the common noticeable thing, rather than focusing on maybe there's science experiments that look for the anomalies, which would still mean separating what's coming up mostly to look at what's the anomaly. So it's always looking for patterns. And so that's really what I'm fascinated in, and that's what I'd like to bring is the idea of neurodiversity is the whole scope of humans. Neurotypical is potentially only existing as we think of it as what we're reacting to as normal. I would probably say I'm neurotypical in one area of my brain and I'm neurodiverse in another. And it's only down to what people will judge me about how whether I'm good or bad at something, a particular thing, and or whether I'm normal at being dyslexic. I'm or I'm not so good at whatever. So yeah, neurodivergence is the typical group and it's useful. Just rounding it up really. The neurodivergence is what's the situation? Can I associate with this so that I can not focus on it itself, but use it as a stepping stone to find out what to do next.
Brilliant. Absolutely. And you know what? The one thing I really like to bring to the fore with my work is that no matter what is going on with the brain, whether it's from newborn right through to dementia and the elderly, everything in between, all the mental health disorders, all the forms of neurodiversity and neurodivergent traits, every human being has exactly the same emotional cycle. And that is what I teach in my workshops, in my online courses, in my books. So if you want to understand the emotional side of it, then absolutely reach out and talk to me. And I know for Rory's, all the thoughts, the feelings, the processes that go on in the mind and how we interact with the world, whether we are neurodivergent or not, if you are feeling stuck and procrastinating with anything, I know that Rory's thought practices and approaches, I don't know if you probably better explain it than me, are absolutely the same again for everybody. So even if there is a neurodivergent diagnosis that we've not touched on today or haven't discussed, it doesn't mean we're excluding you. There are just so many. But the two strategies that we have between us will assist with all of them. So it's down to you reaching out and thinking, do you know what? Maybe there is something in what these two strange people online have got to say. And reach out and have a conversation with us because it's totally free, no obligation for that. And we'll go from there and see if there's anything we can do to support you, or drop a comment in the chat below and let us know what you've got from today. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share as well, because it helps to reach as many other people as possible to help them also come to terms with being their higher self. So thank you. Is there anything else you want to cover before we sign out today, Rory?
No, that's it, I think, other than yeah, I like what you said and shared about what I do. Yeah, really, I also put it down to like what decision making, refining decision making and refining action taking so that you can create what you want in your life and get into flow and get out of flow when you want to.
And that is why we are here talking on the self-help bookshelf, because I went to Rory last year and said, I want to build my business. I need help because I get stuck. I procrastinate. I'm overwhelmed. And not only am I building my business, but we're running the self-help bookshelf as well. And, you know, anything is possible. Anything is possible. Never give up. Believe in yourself. We believe in you, and reach out and have a chat with us. So thank you for anybody for watching in today. And we will see you next week with another high leverage actions topic. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.